Hi, I'm Evelyn. I thought fathers were supposed to believe in their daughters, to see potential where others saw problems. Instead, at my college graduation, the day I thought would finally make him proud, my dad looked me dead in the eye and said, "Face it, Evie. You're a dreamer living in fantasy land. You'll never amount to anything in the real world." 3 years later, Forbes called to interview me about selling my tech company for $67 million. Turns out, Fantasyland pays pretty well. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Because sometimes the people who doubt you the loudest become the quietest when success starts speaking for itself. The morning of my graduation from Riverside University felt like redemption wrapped in polyester. I'd worked 3 jobs throughout college, tutoring calculus at the Learning Center, coding websites for local businesses, and serving weekend brunches at Maple Grove Cafe, all while maintaining a 3.8 GPA in computer science. My dorm room looked like a battlefield of energy drink cans and printouts, evidence of countless all-nighters spent perfecting algorithms and debugging code that most of my classmates couldn't even read. I remember standing in front of my dorm mirror adjusting the cap that kept sliding off my unruly auburn curls, thinking this was it. This was the moment my father, Vincent Castellanos, would finally see me as more than his impractical daughter who lived in her head too much. Maybe he'd even crack a smile when they called my name, summa cum laude, the first person in our family to graduate from a 4-year university. Hunaba, I'd imagined this day for months. Dad would take pictures, maybe even brag to his construction crew buddies about his daughter, the computer programmer. We'd go to dinner at Romano's, the fancy Italian place downtown that he always said was too expensive for regular folks like us. He'd ask about my job prospects, my plans, maybe even admit he was wrong about all those times he called my coding, playing around on the computer. But Vincent Castellanos had never been the type of man to admit he was wrong about anything. He arrived 15 minutes late to the ceremony, still wearing his paint-splattered work boots and a faded flannel shirt that smelled like sawdust and stale coffee. While other families filled entire rows with grandparents, aunts, uncles, and family friends armed with cameras and balloons, my cheering section consisted of one tired-looking man who kept checking his phone and glancing at his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. My name echoed across the auditorium: Evelyn Castellanos, Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, summa cum laude. I walked across that stage with my head high, my heart hammering against my ribs, searching the sea of faces for some sign of pride, some flicker of approval in my father's weathered face. Nothing. He clapped mechanically, the same polite applause he'd give a stranger. After the ceremony, families flooded the courtyard, taking pictures and exchanging congratulations. I found Dad leaning against his beat-up Ford pickup, arms crossed, staring at something in the distance like he was calculating square footage for a job site. "So," I said, trying to keep my voice light, "what did you think?" "Pretty cool, right? Summa cum laude means—" "I know what it means, Evie." His voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. "Question is, what are you going to do with it?" I blinked, thrown off by his tone. "Well, I've got some interviews lined up. Tech Nova in Burlington wants to meet with me next week, and there's this startup in Cleveland." "Startups!" he snorted, pushing off from the truck. "You know what a startup is? It's a fancy word for unemployed with delusions of grandeur." The words hit like a slap. Around us, other families celebrated, took selfies, made dinner plans. A girl from my programming class squealed as her grandmother handed her a bouquet of roses. Another classmate's father lifted her off the ground in a bear hug while shouting about how proud he was. "Dad, I don't understand. This is good news. I graduated with honors. Companies actually want to hire me."
"Companies want to hire everyone, Evie. Doesn't mean they'll keep you." He pulled his keys from his pocket. the metal jangling like a death knell. Look, I've been working since I was 16. Real work. Building things people can see, touch, live in. That's honest work. This computer stuff, it's all smoke and mirrors. I felt something crack inside my chest. It's not smoke and mirrors, Dad. Software runs the world now. Banking, hospitals, cars, phones. And when all that technology breaks down, who's going to fix the real problems? Who's going to build the houses, fix the roads, wire the electricity? He opened the truck door, 1 foot already on the running board. You're smart, Evie. Always have been. Too smart for your own good, maybe. But being smart in school isn't the same as being smart in life. The parking lot was emptying now, families heading off to celebration dinners and photo sessions. I stood there in my graduation gown, feeling smaller than I had in years. I'm proud of you for finishing, Dad said, and for a second, hope fluttered in my chest. But college doesn't change reality. You're a dreamer, just like your mother was. And dreamers don't make it in the real world. He paused, one hand on the steering wheel, and delivered the words that would echo in my head for the next 3 years. Face it, Evie, you're living in fantasy land. You'll never amount to anything in the real world. The truck engine turned over with a rumble, and he was gone, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot of my greatest achievement, holding a diploma that suddenly felt as worthless as tissue paper. I didn't cry. Not then. I just stood there, watching his taillights disappear into the Millbrook traffic, and made a promise to myself that I wouldn't fully understand until 3 years later when my phone rang with the most important call of my life. I was going to prove him wrong. I just didn't know yet how spectacularly wrong he was about his dreamer daughter. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The weeks following graduation felt like living in a parallel universe where everyone else had received the instruction manual for post-college life, and I was left fumbling through the pages written in a language I didn't understand. My father's words had lodged themselves somewhere between my confidence and my ambition, creating a constant background hum of doubt that made every job interview feel like an audition for a role I wasn't sure I deserved. Technova's offices in Burlington were everything I'd imagined a real tech company would be. Sleek glass walls, standing desks, and enough energy drinks in the break room fridge to power a small city. The interview went well, or at least I thought it did. The hiring manager, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Wynn, seemed impressed by my portfolio of college projects and the freelance websites I'd built for local Millbrook businesses. Your code is clean, she said, scrolling through my GitHub repository on her massive monitor. Efficient. You think like a problem solver, not just a programmer. For the first time since graduation, I felt that familiar flutter of possibility in my chest. Maybe Dad was wrong. Maybe there was a place for dreamers in the real world after all. We'd like to offer you a position as a junior software developer, Patricia continued, and I had to bite my lip to keep from grinning like an idiot. Starting salary is $52,000, full benefits, 2 weeks vacation, standard entry-level package, $52,000. More money than my father made in a good year swinging hammers and hauling lumber. I wanted to call him right there in Patricia's office. Wanted to hear him admit that maybe, just maybe, his daughter's computer games were worth something after all. I accepted on the spot. The first few months at Technova were everything I'd hoped for, and nothing I'd expected. The work was challenging but manageable, mostly maintaining existing software and fixing bugs in systems that had been built years before I arrived. My cubicle was small and windowless, wedged between the printer and the supply closet, but it was mine. Every morning, I'd sit down at my dual-monitor setup, crack my knuckles, and dive into code like a swimmer diving into familiar water. But something was missing. The problems I was solving felt small, insignificant. I was basically a digital janitor, cleaning up other people's messes and following instructions that came down from senior developers who barely knew my name. When I tried to suggest improvements or propose new features, I was told to focus on your assigned tasks and learn the system before trying to change it. During lunch breaks, I'd sit in the break room, scrolling through tech blogs and startup news, reading about 20-something entrepreneurs who were building companies that changed the world. Women like Jessica Chen, no relation to anyone I knew, who'd sold her logistics app for $30 million, or David Rivera, who'd turned a college dorm room idea into a platform used by millions. They were my age, sometimes younger, and they were making decisions that affected entire industries. Meanwhile, I was fixing display bugs in a customer database that hadn't been updated since 2019. The worst part wasn't the mundane work or the low pay or even the condescending senior developers who treated me like I was lucky to be there. The worst part was that I was starting to believe my father might be right. Maybe this was as good as it got for someone like me. Maybe being a real programmer meant spending your days in a windowless cube, making small fixes to other people's big ideas. 6 months into the job, during one of our awkward monthly phone calls, Dad asked how work was going. "It's good," I lied, stirring pasta sauce on my apartment stove with one hand and holding the phone with the other. "Learning a lot. You still like it? The computer stuff?" There was something in his voice. Not quite hope, but maybe the absence of certainty. Like he was genuinely curious whether his daughter had found something real in her fantasy land. "Yeah, Dad, I like it." "Good," he said, and I could hear him settling into his recliner, the familiar creak of old leather and tired springs. "Just don't get too comfortable, you know. Companies these days, they'll replace you with someone cheaper the minute they get a chance." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that skilled developers were in demand, that technology wasn't going anywhere, that his fears were outdated. But standing in my tiny Burlington apartment, eating leftover takeout and staring at code on my laptop screen that would be forgotten the moment I submitted it, I wasn't sure he was wrong. "I know, Dad. I'm not trying to bring you down, Evie. I just want you to be realistic. Maybe start thinking about a backup plan. Something stable. A backup plan. Like my computer science degree was just an expensive hobby that I'd eventually outgrow. Like a childhood obsession with dinosaurs or astronomy. Like the 4 years I'd spent learning programming languages and algorithm design were just elaborate preparation for inevitable failure." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, not working on anything for Technova, but exploring an idea that had been nagging at me for months. Small businesses in Millbrook, places like the cafe where I'd worked during college, the bookstore downtown, the family-owned restaurants that had been struggling to adapt to online ordering, they all had the same problem. They needed technology solutions, but they couldn't afford the big companies that charge tens of thousands for basic websites and simple applications. What if there was a way to build something that could help them? Something scalable, affordable, something that could make a real difference. I opened a new file and started typing. Not for Technova, not for any assignment or deadline or senior developer's approval. Just for me, and for the possibility that maybe Dad's dream or daughter could build something that mattered. I called it Local Connect, a platform that would help small businesses manage everything from inventory to customer relationships to online presence, all in one simple, affordable package. I had no idea I was building the foundation of a $67 million empire. I just knew I was tired of living in other people's dreams, and it was time to build my own. The next 18 months blurred together in a haze of split personalities and stolen hours. By day, I was Evelyn, the junior developer, dutifully fixing bugs and attending status meetings where I nodded along to discussions about quarterly metrics and client retention rates. By night, I was someone else entirely, a woman hunched over her laptop at 2 a.m., building something that felt like the future. Local Connect started as a weekend project, but it quickly consumed every spare moment I had. I'd come home from Technova, microwave some leftover Chinese food, and dive into code until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped. The platform was ambitious, maybe too ambitious for someone working alone. But every feature I built felt like a small rebellion against the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my father. The first version was rough around the edges, held together with caffeine and determination more than elegant coding practices. But it worked. The basic inventory management system could track products, monitor stock levels, and send automatic reorder alerts. The customer relationship module could store contact information, track purchase history, and send targeted marketing emails. The website builder let small business owners create professional-looking sites without touching a single line of code. I tested it first on Maple Grove Cafe, the place where I'd served weekend brunches throughout college. The owner, Mrs. Catherine Brennan, had been struggling with a paper-based system that involved 3 different notebooks, a shoebox full of receipts, and a level of organizational chaos that would make a tornado look methodical. "Evie, honey," she said when I pitched the idea over coffee one Saturday morning, "I can barely figure out how to use the new cash register. You really think I can handle computer software?" But Catherine had always been kind to me during my college years, letting me study during slow periods and never complaining when I accidentally gave someone decaf instead of regular during finals week. She agreed to let me install Local Connect on the ancient computer in her back office, mostly, I suspected, because she felt sorry for me. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Within 2 weeks, Catherine had digitized her entire inventory, set up automatic ordering for her most popular items, and created a customer database that let her send personalized birthday discounts to regular customers. Her food costs dropped by 15% the first month, just from better tracking and reduced waste. "This is magic," she told me, staring at a report that showed her busiest hours, best-selling items, and profit margins broken down by day of the week. I had no idea Tuesday afternoons were so dead, or that people buy twice as many muffins when it rains. Word spread the way it does in small towns, quietly at first, then all at once. The bookstore owner asked if I could modify the system to track rare book orders. The owner of Millbrook Hardware wanted to know if it could manage seasonal inventory fluctuations. Betty's Flower Shop needed something that could handle special event planning and delivery scheduling. Each new client meant new features, new challenges, new nights spent coding until sunrise. I became an expert at functioning on 4 hours of sleep and industrial-strength coffee. My Technova performance reviews started including phrases like, "seems distracted," and lacking focus on assigned priorities. But I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I was building something that mattered, something that made a real difference in people's lives. Hubade, the financial picture was less inspiring. I was charging each client a modest monthly fee, $49 for basic features, $99 for premium, barely enough to cover server costs and the software licenses I needed to keep everything running. After 18 months of development, Local Connect had 23 active users and was generating about $1,400 per month in revenue. Hardly the stuff of Forbes headlines, but the users loved it. Catherine started recommending Local Connect to every business owner she met. The hardware store owner's efficiency improvements were so dramatic that he started telling customers about the miracle software his friend's daughter had built. Betty's Flower Shop posted about Local Connect on social media, crediting it with helping her survive the slow winter months when wedding bookings dried up. The reviews and testimonials poured in faster than I could read them. Small business owners who had been drowning in paperwork and inefficiency were suddenly running lean, profitable operations. They were spending less time on administrative tasks and more time actually serving customers. Some were expanding, hiring new employees, opening second locations. I was changing lives, one spreadsheet at a time. The problem was, I was slowly killing myself in the process. The dual life of full-time employee and part-time entrepreneur was unsustainable. I had gained 15 pounds from stress eating and lost count of how many social events I'd missed to work on code. My apartment looked like a disaster zone, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd called any of my college friends. Worse, the technical challenges were outpacing my ability to solve them alone. Local Connect was growing beyond what one person could manage. The server infrastructure needed upgrading. The code base needed refactoring. Customer support was becoming a full-time job by itself. I needed help, but help required money, and money required investment, and investment required admitting that I was trying to build something bigger than a side project. It required admitting that maybe I was more than just a junior developer with delusions of grandeur. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in March. I was debugging a particularly stubborn integration issue that had been plaguing the system for weeks, something that should have taken an hour but had stretched into its 4th straight evening of troubleshooting. My eyes were dry and burning, my back ached from hunching over my laptop, and I could feel the familiar tension headache building behind my temples. My phone rang. "Dad." "Hey, sweetheart. How's work?" "It's fine," I lied, staring at lines of code that seemed to be mocking me. "Just working on a project." "This late?" They're really working you hard at that computer company. I almost laughed. If only he knew that Technova was the easy part of my day. The 8 hours of predictable, unchallenging work that I sleepwalked through before coming home to tackle the real challenges. Dad, can I ask you something? Sure. When you started your construction business, were you scared? There was a long pause. Dad had launched Castellanos Construction 20 years ago, with nothing but a pickup truck and a toolbox full of secondhand equipment. It wasn't a huge operation, just him and 2 employees. But it was his. Terrified, he said finally. Your mother thought I was crazy leaving a steady paycheck to work for myself. Said I'd end up bankrupt within a year. But you did it anyway. Had to. Working for other people, building their dreams. It was killing me slowly. I knew I'd regret it forever if I didn't at least try. I stared at my reflection in my laptop screen, seeing a ghost of myself superimposed over the code. Do you ever regret it? Never. Even in the lean years, even when we could barely make payroll, I never regretted betting on myself. Another pause. Why are you asking? Just curious. But as I hung up the phone, I realized I wasn't just curious. I was standing at the same crossroads he'd faced 20 years ago, the same choice between security and possibility that every entrepreneur eventually confronts. The difference was, I had something he'd never had when he started his business. I had proof that my dream actually worked. The decision to leave Technova didn't come as a lightning bolt moment of clarity. Instead, it crept up on me like dawn, breaking over a sleepless night, gradual, inevitable, and somehow both terrifying and beautiful at the same time. It was a Thursday morning in early April when I finally admitted to myself that I was living 2 incompatible lives. I'd been at my desk for exactly 17 minutes, staring at a bug report for a legacy system that probably should have been retired during the Obama administration, when my phone buzzed with a local Connect notification. Another new client had signed up overnight, a small veterinary clinic in Cedar Falls that had found us through word-of-mouth recommendations that made 37 active users. Still small by Silicon Valley standards, but each one represented a real business, real people whose lives were getting measurably better because of something I'd built in my spare time. The irony wasn't lost on me that my hobby project was having more meaningful impact than anything I'd accomplished in 2 years of professional software development. Patricia Wynn materialized beside my cubicle with the stealth of a hunting cat. Morning, Evelyn. How's the Morrison account coming along? The Morrison account. 3 weeks of mind-numbing work to add a new field to a customer intake form. The kind of task that would take me 20 minutes in local Connect but required endless meetings, documentation, and approval chains at Technova. Almost finished, I said, minimizing the local Connect notification and pulling up the Morrison files. Should have it ready for testing by end of day. Excellent. After that, I've got another exciting project for you. The Stevens Group wants us to change the color of their submit button from blue to green. She said it with complete sincerity, as if choosing between blue and green represented the cutting edge of technological innovation. I nodded and smiled and tried to ignore the part of my soul that died a little every time I pretended that this was meaningful work. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I took a long lunch break and drove to Millbrook to check on Catherine at the cafe. I told myself it was customer service, making sure Local Connect was running smoothly, but really I just needed to see proof that my work mattered. I found Catherine in her back office, hunched over the computer, with expression of intense concentration that I'd never seen during my college waitressing days. The screen showed Local Connect's analytics dashboard, displaying real-time data about customer traffic, popular menu items, and profit margins. "Evie," she exclaimed when she noticed me in the doorway. "Perfect timing. Look at this." She pointed to a graph showing customer patterns over the past month. "See this spike every Tuesday around 3 p.m.? I had no idea we were getting a rush then. Turns out it's the ladies from the book club next door. So I started preparing extra lemon bars and advertising our book club special on social media. Tuesday sales are up 40%. The pride in her voice was unmistakable. Catherine wasn't just using my software. She was thriving because of it. She was making data-driven decisions, optimizing her business, growing her customer base. She was thinking like an entrepreneur, instead of just a shop owner trying to survive another month. And look here, she continued, clicking to another screen. The automatic inventory tracking caught a supplier error last week. They tried to charge me for 3 cases of coffee beans when I only received 2. Would have cost me $60 if Local Connect hadn't flagged the discrepancy. $60 might not sound like much to someone pulling down a Technova salary, but for a small cafe operating on razor-thin margins, it was the difference between a profitable week and a loss. I spent an hour with Catherine, listening to her plans for expanding the cafe's catering service and potentially opening a second location. Every idea she shared was informed by data from Local Connect, customer preferences, peak demand times, seasonal trends that had been invisible before she had the right tools to see them. Driving back to Burlington, I felt like I was returning to prison after a brief taste of freedom. The Technova office building looked smaller somehow, less impressive than it had when I first walked through those glass doors 2 years ago. The afternoon stretched ahead of me like a tunnel with no light at the end. More bug reports, more meetings about meetings, more small fixes to systems that nobody cared about. I made it through exactly 47 minutes of work before I opened my laptop and started researching what it would take to quit my job and run Local Connect full-time. The numbers were sobering. 37 clients paying an average of $74 per month meant roughly $2,700 in monthly recurring revenue. My apartment rent alone was $1,200, and that didn't include food, utilities, student loans, or the growing server costs that came with an expanding user base. I'd need at least triple my current revenue just to break even, and that assumed zero growth in expenses. But there was something else in the numbers, something that made my heart race with possibility rather than panic. The growth rate. Local Connect was adding new clients every week, almost entirely through word-of-mouth referrals. I wasn't spending a dime on marketing, yet businesses were finding us and signing up because other business owners couldn't stop talking about the results they were seeing. That evening, I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I called my college friend Rebecca, who'd graduated with me but immediately joined a startup in Austin instead of playing it safe with an established company. "Evie," she answered on the second ring. "Oh my God, it's been forever. How's the corporate life treating you?" "That's actually why I'm calling," I said, pacing around my apartment like a caged animal. "I need some advice." I told her everything. Local Connect, the client growth, the sleepless nights, the growing certainty that I was wasting my potential at Technova. She listened without interrupting, which I should have recognized as a warning sign. "Okay," she said when I finished. "First question, are you insane?" "Excuse me? You built something that 37 businesses are paying for. You're generating almost $3,000 a month in passive income. You have organic growth and customer retention that most startups would kill for. And you're worried about whether you should quit your day job?" Put that way, it sounded almost reasonable. But what if it fails? What if I can't scale it? What if I'm not smart enough to run a real company? What if you are? Rebecca shot back. What if you're sitting on the next big thing and you're too scared to find out? Look, I've been in the startup world for 2 years now. I've seen companies with way less traction than yours raise millions in funding. You've already proven product market fit. You've got paying customers who love your product enough to recommend it to others. The only thing you're missing is the balls to bet on yourself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, doing mental math over and over again. If I could double my client base, I'd have enough to cover basic expenses. If I could triple it, I'd be making more than my Technova salary. If I could grow it 10 times, I'd be running a real business. Boha! The scariest part wasn't the financial risk. It was the possibility that my father might be right, that I really was just a dreamer living in Fantasyland, and that quitting a stable job to chase an impossible dream would prove his point once and for all. But lying there in the dark, surrounded by the quiet hum of my laptop running Local Connect's automated systems, I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't chasing a dream anymore. I was running from one. The email arrived on a Monday morning at 7:43 a.m., buried between a spam message about cryptocurrency and a meeting reminder from Technova's HR department. The sender was someone named Marcus Chen from Velocity Ventures, and the subject line read, "Investment Opportunity, Local Connect." I stared at the screen, convinced it was some kind of elaborate phishing scam. Investment firms didn't email random software developers in Burlington about their side projects, especially not investment firms with sleek websites and portfolios that included companies I'd read about in TechCrunch. But the email was legitimate, detailed, and specific enough to make my hands shake as I read it. Ms. Castellanos, we've been tracking Local Connect's growth through our market analysis tools and are impressed by your customer acquisition metrics and retention rates. We'd like to schedule a call to discuss potential partnership opportunities. Partnership opportunities. Investment. Words that belonged in other people's stories, not mine. I read the email 3 times before it sank in that this was real. Someone with actual money and actual business expertise thought Local Connect was worth their attention. Not just worth attention, worth investment. The phone call was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. I spent the intervening days in a state of controlled panic, oscillating between excitement and terror. I researched Velocity Ventures until I could recite their portfolio companies from memory. I practiced my pitch in the mirror, in my car, and to my confused neighbor who had the misfortune of checking her mail while I was rehearsing in the hallway. Thursday arrived with all the subtlety of a freight train. I took a long lunch from Technova, found a quiet corner of the local library, and dialed into what would either be the most important conversation of my career or the most humiliating 15 minutes of my life. Marcus Chen turned out to be younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from making successful bets on other people's dreams. He cut straight to the point. Evelyn, I'll be honest with you. We've been watching Local Connect for about 3 months now. The numbers are impressive. Consistent month-over-month growth, strong customer retention, organic acquisition through referrals. That's the holy trinity of SaaS metrics. SaaS. Software as a service. He was using the right terminology, treating Local Connect like a real technology company, instead of a glorified side project. I tried to keep the excitement out of my voice. Thank you. The growth has been encouraging. Encouraging? Marcus laughed. You're being modest. Most startups would kill for your retention rates. 96% of your customers are still active after 6 months. That tells us you're solving a real problem in a meaningful way. The conversation that followed felt like being recruited for a sport I didn't know I was playing. Marcus talked about market size. Apparently, the small business software market was worth billions and growing rapidly. He mentioned competitors I'd never heard of. Companies with names like Small Biz Solutions and Local Logic that were raising massive funding rounds to solve the same problems Local Connect was already solving. Here's what we're thinking, Marcus said, his voice taking on the tone of someone about to make an offer. Velocity would like to lead a Series A funding round. We're talking about $2.5 million for a 30% equity stake. $2.5 million. I actually dropped my phone. Literally. It clattered onto the library table with enough force that the elderly man reading newspapers at the next table looked over with concern. Sorry, I whispered, fumbling to pick up the phone. Could you repeat that? $2.5 million, Marcus said, apparently accustomed to this kind of reaction. That would give you the runway to hire a development team, scale your infrastructure, and really go after market share. We think Local Connect could be a $100 million company within 5 years. $100 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, like discussing the distance to Mars. I was still processing the idea of quitting my $52,000 job, and this stranger was talking about building something worth more than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. I need to think about it, I managed to say. Of course. This is a big decision. Take some time, talk to a lawyer, maybe consult with some advisors. But don't take too long. The market is moving fast, and we're not the only firm that's noticed what you're building. The call ended with promises to send term sheets and legal documents, but I barely heard the logistics. I sat in the library for another hour, staring at my laptop screen showing Local Connect's modest dashboard of 39 active clients, trying to reconcile the small numbers with Marcus's grand vision. That evening, I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I called my father. Hey, Dad, how's everything? Can't complain. Just finished a big renovation job for the Hendersons. Their kitchen turned out real nice. There was pride in his voice, the satisfaction of work well done. How's the computer job? Actually, Dad, I wanted to talk to you about something. Remember that side project I mentioned? The software for small businesses? Yeah, the thing you've been working on at night? Still messing around with that? Messing around. Even now, even with an investment offer on the table, he couldn't quite take it seriously. Someone wants to invest in it. A real investment firm. They want to give me $2.5 million. The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. $2.5 million? Dad's voice was careful, like he was testing the words to see if they made sense. You sure this isn't some kind of scam? I researched them, Dad. Velocity Ventures is legitimate. They funded companies that went on to be worth hundreds of millions. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed somehow, become smaller. Jesus, Evie. $2.5 million. He cleared his throat. What would you do with that kind of money? Hire employees, build a real company, try to help thousands of small businesses instead of just a few dozen. And they think it's worth that much? Your little computer program? There it was. The doubt, the disbelief, the fundamental inability to understand that his daughter might have built something valuable. But this time, instead of crushing me, it crystallized something inside my chest. It's not a little computer program, Dad. It's a platform that's helping real businesses make real money. Mrs. Brennan's Cafe increased her profits by 20% using Local Connect. The hardware store cut their inventory costs in half. These aren't games or fantasy. They're results. I just don't want you to get your hopes up too high, he said, falling back on his familiar refrain. These investor types, they make a lot of promises. What if they're just trying to take advantage of you? What if they're not? I shot back. What if I actually built something important? What if your dreamer daughter knows what she's doing? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with 25 years of accumulated doubt and dismissed ambitions. I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, sweetheart. I just want you to be careful. I know, Dad, but maybe it's time to be careful about different things. Maybe it's time to be careful about not taking risks, about playing it too safe, about letting other people's fear hold me back. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down every reason to take the investment and every reason to walk away. The list of pros filled 2 pages. The list of cons had exactly one item. What if I fail? But as I stared at that single line, I realized the real question wasn't what would happen if I failed. It was what would happen if I succeeded beyond my father's wildest imagination. And suddenly, that possibility didn't feel terrifying anymore. It felt inevitable. The term sheet arrived via email on Friday afternoon, 47 pages of legal language that might as well have been written in ancient Sanskrit for all the sense it made to me. I printed the entire document at Technova's copier, probably violating several company policies in the process, and spent my weekend spread across my living room floor with the papers, 3 different highlighters, and a growing pile of coffee cups that marked my progression through the most important contract of my life. By Sunday evening, I'd managed to decode most of the essential terms. Velocity Ventures would invest $2.5 million for a 30% equity stake, valuing Local Connect at roughly $8.3 million. The money would come in tranches tied to specific milestones, user growth targets, revenue benchmarks, technical developments. There were board seats to be allocated, liquidation preferences to understand, and something called anti-dilution provisions that my Googling suggested were either completely standard or potentially devastating depending on which legal blog you believed. I needed help. Real help from someone who understood the difference between entrepreneur-friendly terms and investor-friendly terms. Someone who could translate the legalese into plain English and help me avoid signing away my future for the sake of immediate funding. That's how I found myself in the law offices of Morrison & Associates the following Tuesday, sitting across from Elena Morrison, a sharp-eyed attorney who specialized in startup law and had the kind of direct communication style that I found both terrifying and reassuring. First things first, Elena said, scanning the term sheet with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen hundreds of similar documents. This is a reasonable offer from a reputable firm. The valuation is fair based on your current metrics, and the terms aren't egregiously founder-unfriendly. But I could hear the qualifier coming. But you need to understand what you're signing up for. Taking VC money isn't just about getting capital. It's about getting partners who will have opinions about every major decision you make going forward. Board meetings, quarterly reviews, growth targets that will make your current stress levels look like a vacation. She walked me through the implications of each section, explaining how the liquidation preferences worked. Investors get their money back first if the company is sold. What the anti-dilution provisions meant, my ownership percentage could get diluted in future funding rounds, and how the board composition would affect my control over company decisions. I'd retain majority control, but barely. My advice, Elena said, leaning back in her chair, is to take the weekend to really think about whether you want to build the kind of company that venture capital demands. Because once you take this money, you're not just running a nice little software business anymore. You're building something that needs to return hundreds of millions of dollars to justify the investment. Hundreds of millions of dollars. The number still felt surreal, like discussing the budget for a space mission or the GDP of a small country. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in months. I turned off my laptop, ignored my phone, and took a long drive through the Vermont countryside. I needed to think without the constant ping of Local Connect notifications or the pressure of Technova deadlines. I needed to figure out who I was and what I actually wanted. The drive took me through small towns that looked like postcards. Village greens surrounded by white church steeples, family-owned diners with hand-painted signs, hardware stores that had been serving the same families for 3 generations. These were the kinds of businesses that Local Connect was designed to help. The mom-and-pop operations that couldn't afford enterprise software solutions, but desperately needed better tools to compete in an increasingly digital world. I stopped for lunch at a place called Riverside Grill in a town called Fairmont that couldn't have had more than 2,000 residents. The owner, a woman named Carol who looked to be in her early 60s, seated me at a table by the window and struck up a conversation about how quiet things had been since the ski season ended. "We do okay in winter when the tourists come through," she explained, refilling my coffee cup without being asked. "But spring and summer are tough. People drive right past us to get to the bigger restaurants in Stowe." I found myself telling her about Local Connect, explaining how it could help her track customer preferences, manage inventory more efficiently, and maybe even build an email list to market to previous visitors. Carol listened with the polite attention of someone humoring a customer, but I could see the skepticism in her eyes. "Honey, I've been running this place for 22 years with a cash register and a notebook. I'm not sure I'm ready to complicate things with computers." It was exactly the kind of response my father would have given, the reflexive resistance to change that I'd been fighting my entire life. But sitting there in Carol's restaurant, watching her manually write down my order on a paper pad, while her competitors in Stowe were probably processing online reservations and analyzing customer data, I realized something that changed my entire perspective on the Velocity Ventures offer. This wasn't about building a $100 million company for the sake of impressing investors or proving my father wrong. It was about scaling solutions to help thousands of Carols who were struggling to adapt to a world that was changing with or without them. The drive back to Burlington clarified everything. I wasn't taking venture capital to get rich. I was taking it to get big enough to matter. To build something that could help not just the 39 businesses currently using Local Connect, but the thousands of small businesses across the country that were being left behind by technological progress they couldn't afford to access. Monday morning, I walked into Patricia Wynn's office and submitted my 2 weeks' notice. "I'm sorry to see you go," Patricia said, though her expression suggested more surprise than genuine disappointment. "Can I ask where you're headed?" "I'm starting my own company." "Ah," she nodded knowingly. "Well, the entrepreneurship bug gets everyone eventually. Good luck with whatever you're building. I hope it works out." The condescension in her voice was subtle, but unmistakable. The same tone you'd use to wish someone luck with their garage band or their novel. The assumption that this was a phase, a quarter-life crisis, that would end with me crawling back to corporate stability with a better appreciation for steady paychecks and predictable career paths. 2 weeks later, I cleaned out my cubicle at Technova, taking with me nothing but a coffee mug and the satisfaction of knowing I'd never have to fix another display bug in someone else's legacy system. The office that had felt like a prison sentence 2 months ago now felt like ancient history, a chapter from someone else's life. That afternoon, I signed the term sheet with Velocity Ventures. The $2.5 million hit my business account 3 days later, the largest number I'd ever seen associated with my name. I stared at the bank balance on my laptop screen, refreshing the page multiple times to make sure it was real. I wasn't Evelyn the junior developer anymore. I wasn't even Evelyn the side project entrepreneur. I was Evelyn Castellanos, CEO of Local Connect, and I had 18 months to prove that my father's dreamer daughter could build something worth $100 million. The real work was just beginning. The first hire changed everything.
Daniel Ortega responded to my job posting for a senior full-stack developer with a resume that made me question whether I was qualified to run my own company. Former Google engineer, MIT graduate, 3 successful startup exits. The kind of person who should have been interviewing me for a position, not the other way around. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Burlington because I didn't have an office yet, just my apartment, which still looked like a hurricane had torn through an electronics store. Daniel was younger than I'd expected, maybe 28, with the kind of relaxed confidence that comes from knowing you can get a job anywhere you want. "So," he said, settling into the booth across from me with a cortado, "tell me why I should leave a 6-figure position at a Series B startup to join a company that's basically you and a laptop." It was a fair question. I'd been asking myself the same thing for weeks. "Because," I said, pulling up Local Connect's user dashboard on my phone, "we're solving a real problem for people who've been ignored by the tech industry. Look at these retention numbers. 97% of our customers are still active after 8 months. That doesn't happen with software that's just nice to have. That happens with software that's essential." I told him about Mrs. Brennan's Cafe, about the hardware store in Millbrook, about the 47 businesses that were now using Local Connect to run more efficient, more profitable operations. I explained my vision for scaling the platform to help thousands of small businesses across the country, about building something that could democratize access to enterprise-level tools. Daniel listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions about the technical architecture. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee with the kind of deliberate precision that suggested he was processing everything I'd said. "The market opportunity is massive," he said finally. "And you're right about the incumbents. Most business software is either too expensive or too complicated for small operators. But building something scalable is going to require a complete rebuild of your current codebase." My heart sank. Complete rebuild? Don't look so worried. It's not a criticism. It's inevitable. What you built as a solo developer got you this far. But serving 1,000 customers requires different architecture than serving 50. We're talking microservices, load balancing, database optimization, automated testing frameworks. It's not just more code. It's fundamentally different code. The technical challenges he outlined over the next hour were staggering. Real-time data synchronization across multiple devices, API integrations with payment processors, shipping companies, and accounting software, mobile apps for iOS and Android. A complete redesign of the user interface based on proper UX research instead of my educated guesses about what small business owners wanted. "It's doable," Daniel said, "but it's easily a 12-month project with a team of 6 or 7 developers. And that's just to get to version 2.0. If you really want to scale to enterprise customers, we're looking at 2 to 3 years of development." The scope was overwhelming, but Daniel's enthusiasm was infectious. He talked about the engineering challenges with the kind of excitement most people reserved for vacation planning. More importantly, he seemed to genuinely believe that Local Connect could become something significant. "I'll take the job," he said, extending his hand across the table. "But I want equity and a senior title. If we're going to build something this ambitious, I want skin in the game." Within 6 weeks, we'd assembled a team that transformed my apartment-based operation into something that looked suspiciously like a real technology company. Sarah Kim, a designer who'd worked at Airbnb and had opinions about user experience that were both passionate and correct. Marcus Wright, a DevOps engineer who could make servers scale and databases perform like Formula One race cars. Jessica Torres, a product manager who understood small business operations better than I did despite never having run one herself. We rented office space in a converted warehouse in Burlington's South End, complete with exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and the kind of open floor plan that made every conversation a group discussion. I bought standing desks, ergonomic chairs, and enough coffee equipment to fuel a small army. The monthly burn rate jumped from my previous expenses of basically zero to nearly $30,000, a number that would have kept me awake at night if I hadn't been too exhausted to worry about money.
The work itself was intoxicating. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who were as committed to the vision as I was, who could execute at a level that made my previous solo efforts look like finger painting. The development velocity was incredible. Features that would have taken me weeks to implement alone were being completed in days by our coordinated team effort. But the real revelation was watching Daniel and the others interact with actual local Connect customers. We instituted weekly user interviews, 30-minute video calls with business owners who could show us exactly how they were using the platform and where they were running into problems. The feedback was immediate, specific, and often brutal. "The inventory management is great," said Tom Wheeler, who owned a sporting goods store in Portland, Maine, "but the reporting interface makes my eyes bleed. I need to see monthly trends, not just weekly snapshots." "The customer database is solid," added Linda Santos from her bakery in Providence, "but I can't figure out how to segment customers by purchase history. I want to send different promotions to people who buy wedding cakes versus people who just grab coffee and donuts." Each user interview revealed gaps in our understanding. Features we'd assumed were intuitive that were actually confusing. Workflows that made perfect sense to software developers but were completely backwards for people trying to run restaurants and retail stores. The redesign process was humbling and energizing in equal measure. We threw out roughly 60% of the original interface, rebuilt core functionality from scratch, and added dozens of features that users had been requesting through our support channels. The new version of Local Connect looked professional, felt intuitive, and could handle the kind of scale that would be necessary to serve thousands of customers instead of dozens. But the most significant change wasn't technical, it was philosophical. We stopped thinking of ourselves as a software company that happened to serve small businesses, and started thinking of ourselves as small business advocates who happened to use software as our tool. Every feature decision was filtered through a single question. Does this make it easier for a person like Carol at Riverside Grill to run a more successful business? The beta launch of Local Connect 2.0 was scheduled for the first week of December, exactly 1 year after I'd taken the first call from Marcus at Velocity Ventures. We'd gone from a solo developer with a side project to a funded startup with a real product and a growing team of people who believed in the mission. The night before launch, I stood in our office after everyone else had gone home, looking at the wall where we'd hung framed screenshots of positive customer reviews. 47 businesses had become 127 businesses. Monthly recurring revenue had grown from $3,400 to $18,600. The team had expanded from just me to 8 full-time employees who were genuinely excited to come to work every day. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "How's the computer business going?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "We're about to find out." Tomorrow would determine whether we'd built something that could scale beyond my wildest expectations, or whether we'd just created a more expensive way to serve the same small market we'd started with. Either way, we were no longer playing in the minor leagues. The launch of Local Connect 2.0 went live at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in December, and by 6:47 a.m. I knew we had a problem. Not a catastrophic, company-ending problem, but the kind of problem that separates successful startups from cautionary tales. We were growing too fast for our infrastructure to handle. The first sign was the support ticket queue. Sarah Kim, who had been monitoring user feedback since the beta launch announcement, watched the notification count climb from 12 to 47 to 93 in the span of an hour. Most weren't complaints about bugs or broken features. They were requests for help with onboarding, questions about advanced functionality, and inquiries about custom integrations from businesses that were significantly larger than our typical small-town cafe or hardware store. Evelyn, Sarah called from her desk, her voice carrying the particular note of excitement mixed with panic that had become our team's default emotional state. "You need to see this." She pulled up our analytics dashboard, which showed real-time user registrations. The graph looked like a ski slope, a gentle incline for the first hour, then a sharp vertical climb that showed no signs of leveling off. In 6 hours, we'd added more new users than we typically saw in an entire month. "Where are they coming from?" I asked, leaning over her shoulder to study the traffic sources. That's the weird part. It's not social media or paid advertising. Most of the referral traffic is coming from business forums and industry publications. Someone wrote about us, and it's spreading. The someone turned out to be Jennifer Walsh, a business journalist for Inc. magazine who discovered Local Connect through her research for an article about technology adoption among small businesses. Her piece, titled "The $50 Software That's Revolutionizing Main Street," had gone live at 3 a.m. and was already being shared across LinkedIn, Twitter, and every small business forum on the internet. Local Connect represents something rare in the software world, Walsh had written. A tool that was actually designed by someone who understands the daily struggles of small business owners. While enterprise software companies have spent billions building complex solutions for large corporations, Evelyn Castellanos and her team have created something that a bakery owner can master in an afternoon and afford on a shoestring budget. The article included screenshots of our dashboard, quotes from satisfied customers, and a detailed breakdown of our pricing structure. But the real impact came from Walsh's analysis of our approach to product development, the weekly user interviews, the focus on practical functionality over flashy features, the recognition that small business owners needed software that worked the way they thought, not the way developers thought. By noon, we'd registered 312 new users. By 5 p.m., that number had climbed to 847. The support ticket queue had exploded to over 200 open requests, and Marcus Wright was frantically scaling our server infrastructure to handle traffic levels we hadn't expected to see for another 6 months. "We need to hire customer support staff," Jessica Torres announced during our emergency team meeting that evening. "Like yesterday. I've been responding to tickets for 8 hours straight, and I'm barely making a dent." "And we need to update the onboarding flow," Daniel added. "These new users are asking questions that our current tutorial videos don't address. They're coming from different industries than our beta users: law firms, medical practices, consulting businesses. The workflows are more complex. The problems were good problems, the kind of challenges that venture capitalists dream about when they write checks to early-stage companies. But they were still problems that needed immediate solutions, and solving them required resources we didn't have and expertise we hadn't anticipated needing this soon." The next 2 weeks blurred together in a caffeine-fueled sprint of hiring, training, and rapid product iteration. We brought on 3 customer support specialists, 2 additional developers, and a technical writer who could create documentation that actual humans could understand. Our monthly burn rate jumped to over $60,000, a number that would have terrified me 6 months earlier, but now felt like a necessary investment in sustainable growth. The growth itself was staggering. By the end of December, Local Connect had 2,847 active users across 43 states. Monthly recurring revenue had climbed to $127,000, putting us on track to hit our first $1 million in annual revenue sometime in the spring. Customer testimonials poured in faster than we could read them. Bakeries in Oregon, auto repair shops in Florida, veterinary clinics in Montana, all using Local Connect to streamline operations and increase profitability. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. Our competitors started paying attention. The first sign was a LinkedIn message from someone at Small Biz Solutions, one of the established players in the small business software market. The message was friendly, professional, and completely transparent about what it really was: a job offer disguised as a networking opportunity. "We've been impressed by Local Connect's rapid growth and would love to explore potential synergies between our platforms," the message read. "Would you be interested in discussing how we might work together?" Similar messages followed from other companies in the space, each one slightly more aggressive than the last. One offered to acquire Local Connect outright for an undisclosed sum. Another proposed a strategic partnership that would essentially white-label our technology under their brand. A third suggested that we consider licensing our customer onboarding process to other software companies. The attention was flattering and terrifying in equal measure. On one hand, it confirmed that we'd built something genuinely valuable, something that established companies with millions in revenue and hundreds of employees viewed as a competitive threat. On the other hand, it made clear that our grace period as a small, under-the-radar startup was officially over. "They're scared," Marcus observed during one of our Friday afternoon team meetings. "Companies don't try to acquire or partner with businesses they think are going to fail. They try to acquire businesses they think are going to eat their lunch." The insight crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't articulated. We weren't just building a nice little software company anymore. We were disrupting an established market with entrenched players who had significantly more resources and experience than we did. The next phase of Local Connect's growth would require competing directly with companies that had been in business longer than I'd been writing code. That Friday evening, I found myself back in Millbrook for the first time in months, sitting in Mrs. Brennan's cafe with a cup of coffee and a slice of her famous apple pie. The place looked different somehow. Busier, more organized, more professional. The old paper-based chaos had been replaced by the calm efficiency of a business that understood its operations down to the last detail. "Evelyn!" Catherine called from behind the counter. "I was hoping you'd stop by. I've got news." The news was that Maple Grove Cafe had just signed a lease for a second location across town. The expansion was being funded entirely by the increased profits Catherine had generated through better inventory management, customer targeting, and operational efficiency, all enabled by Local Connect. "I never thought I'd be able to afford a second shop," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "But the numbers don't lie. We're making 30% more profit per customer than we were a year ago, and we're serving 20% more customers overall. The math just works." Driving back to Burlington that night, I realized that Catherine's success story was being replicated across thousands of small businesses around the country. We weren't just building software. We were enabling economic growth at the grassroots level, helping Main Street businesses compete more effectively in an economy that seemed designed to favor large corporations. The thought was both inspiring and daunting. Success at this scale came with responsibilities I'd never considered when Local Connect was just a side project. We weren't just responsible to our investors or our team. We were responsible to the thousands of business owners who were counting on our platform to help them build better lives for themselves and their families. No pressure at all. The call that changed everything came on a Thursday afternoon in March, while I was debugging a particularly stubborn integration issue with our new payment processing system. My phone buzzed with an unknown number bearing a 212 area code Manhattan, and normally I would have let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Ms. Castellanos? This is Rebecca Martinez from Forbes magazine. I'm working on a feature about emerging technology companies that are disrupting traditional industries, and Local Connect has come up repeatedly in my research. Would you have time for a brief conversation?" Forbes, the magazine my father read religiously every month, usually while muttering about rich people problems and fancy business nonsense. The publication that represented everything he considered pretentious and out of touch with real working people. Yes, I think I could make some time," I managed, gesturing frantically to Sarah Kim to close my office door. "Excellent. I've been tracking your growth metrics through our market analysis partners, and the numbers are quite impressive. 57% month-over-month growth, customer retention rates above 95%, and expansion into markets that traditionally haven't been well served by business software. Can you tell me about your approach to product development?" The interview lasted 45 minutes and covered everything from Local Connect's origin story to our technical architecture to my philosophy about building software for underserved markets. Rebecca asked thoughtful questions about customer acquisition costs, competitive positioning, and our plans for international expansion, topics I'd become fluent in through countless investor updates and board meetings, but had never discussed with someone whose job was translating business strategy into stories that general audiences could understand. "One final question," Rebecca said as our conversation wound down. "I've been looking at your funding history, and I see that Velocity Ventures led your Series A. Are you currently raising additional capital?" The honest answer was complicated. We weren't actively fundraising, but Marcus Chen had been dropping hints about a Series B round that could give us the resources to expand internationally and build enterprise-grade features for larger customers. The growth trajectory suggested we'd need significant capital within the next 12 months to maintain our competitive position. We're always open to conversations with the right partners, I said carefully, using the diplomatic language that Jessica Torres had coached me on for investor relations. But our primary focus right now is on execution and customer satisfaction. Understood. Well, thank you for your time, Ms. Castellanos. The article should go live sometime in the next 2 weeks. I'll send you a link when it's published. 2 weeks turned into 10 days, which turned into a Tuesday morning when Sarah Kim burst into my office with her laptop open and an expression that suggested either catastrophic news or life-changing news. "It's live," she said, turning the screen toward me. "And it's the cover story." The Forbes homepage featured a full-color photo of me sitting in our office, looking more confident than I'd felt during the photo shoot 3 days earlier. The headline read, "From College Dorm to $67 million. How Evelyn Castellanos Built the Small Business Software Empire Everyone Missed." $67 million. That was Forbes' estimate of Local Connect's current valuation based on our user growth, revenue trajectory, and comparable company analysis. The number was so large it felt fictional, like discussing the budget for a Hollywood blockbuster or the annual GDP of a small nation. But it was the subtitle that made my hands shake. The 27-year-old CEO whose worthless college project is now revolutionizing Main Street business operations. Rebecca Martinez had done her homework. The article included quotes from 12 different Local Connect customers, detailed analysis of our competitive advantages, and a breakdown of the small business software market that positioned us as a major disruptive force. She'd interviewed industry analysts, venture capitalists, and even some of our competitors, weaving together a narrative that portrayed Local Connect not as a lucky startup, but as an inevitable solution to problems that had been overlooked by the technology industry for decades. Castellanos represents a new generation of entrepreneurs who understand that the most profitable markets aren't always the most obvious ones, the article concluded. While Silicon Valley has spent billions building tools for large corporations and consumer applications, she identified an underserved segment of small businesses that needed sophisticated software but couldn't afford enterprise solutions. The result is a company that's growing faster than most unicorn startups while serving customers that competitors have largely ignored. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour of the article going live, our website traffic had increased by 400%. New user registrations were climbing so rapidly that Marcus Wright had to implement emergency load balancing to prevent our servers from crashing. The support ticket queue exploded with inquiries from businesses we'd never heard of, journalists requesting interviews, and investors wanting to schedule calls. But the message that mattered most came from an unexpected source: my father. The text arrived at 11:47 a.m., just 3 words. Saw the article. I stared at the screen for 5 minutes, wondering what those 3 words meant. Was he proud? Skeptical? Convinced that Forbes had made some kind of mistake? The ambiguity was maddening, but also strangely fitting. After 27 years of trying to decode my father's reactions to my achievements, 3 words somehow captured the complexity of our relationship better than a long conversation might have. The real impact of the Forbes article became clear over the following days, as Local Connect was mentioned in dozens of other publications, business podcasts, and industry newsletters. We were featured in TechCrunch's Startups to Watch list, included in Inc., magazine's roundup of female entrepreneurs changing business, and profiled in Small Business Today as an example of technology that actually works for Main Street. Each mention brought new users, new opportunities, and new challenges. Enterprise customers started inquiring about custom implementations. International businesses wanted to know about our expansion plans. Software companies began reaching out about potential acquisitions or partnerships, some with offer letters attached. The attention was validating and terrifying in equal measure. On one hand, it confirmed that we'd built something genuinely significant, something that industry experts viewed as a major innovation in an established market. On the other hand, it made clear that our quiet period of steady growth was officially over. We were now a public company in everything but the legal sense, with stakeholders and competitors watching our every move. The most surreal moment came 3 days after the Forbes article, when I received a LinkedIn message from Patricia Nguyen, my former manager at Technova. The message was brief and professional. "Congratulations on your success with Local Connect. We're always looking for innovative partners in the small business space. Would you be interested in exploring opportunities?" The woman who'd assigned me to change button colors was now reaching out about potential partnerships with the side project she'd never bothered to ask about during my 2 years of employment. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. But the real validation wasn't the media attention or the acquisition offers, or even the $67 million valuation. It was the customer testimonials that continued pouring in every day. Small business owners who were using Local Connect to build more profitable, more efficient operations. Entrepreneurs who were expanding into new markets because they finally had the tools to manage complex workflows. Families who were achieving financial stability because their businesses were running more effectively. We weren't just building software anymore. We were building economic opportunity, one small business at a time. And my father's dreamer daughter was apparently worth $67 million in the process. The family dinner invitation arrived via text message on a Saturday afternoon in April, exactly 6 weeks after the Forbes article had made me temporarily internet famous. The message was from my mother, Linda, whose communication style had evolved considerably since my last awkward phone conversation with Dad. "Evie, honey, your father and I would love to have you over for Sunday dinner tomorrow. Nothing fancy, just family time. We miss you. Love, Mom." I read the message 3 times, searching for subtext that might explain this sudden interest in family bonding. My parents and I hadn't shared a meal since my college graduation disaster nearly 4 years ago. Our communication had been limited to brief holiday phone calls and the occasional text exchange that felt more obligatory than affectionate. The timing wasn't coincidental. Since the Forbes article, I'd been fielded calls from distant relatives I barely remembered, high school acquaintances who'd suddenly developed keen interests in technology entrepreneurship, and family friends who wanted to catch up over coffee. Everyone, it seemed, was eager to reconnect with Vincent Castellanos' daughter now that she was worth something measurable. I almost declined. The thought of sitting around my childhood dinner table, pretending that years of dismissal and doubt had been erased by a magazine article, felt exhausting. But curiosity won out over self-preservation. I wanted to see how my parents would navigate this new reality, where their Fantasyland daughter had built something more valuable than anything they'd ever imagined. Sunday afternoon found me driving the familiar route to Millbrook, past the cafe where Mrs. Brennan was probably serving her famous apple pie to the usual crowd of regulars. The town looked exactly the same: tree-lined streets, modest houses with well-maintained lawns, the kind of quiet prosperity that came from generations of steady work and careful savings. Nothing had changed except my perspective on what constituted real achievement. My parents' house seemed smaller than I remembered, though that might have been a function of spending my days in Local Connect's expansive office space with its high ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows. The same paint-splattered work truck sat in the driveway. The same ceramic garden gnomes lined the front walkway. The same wind chimes played their discordant melody from the porch eave. Mom answered the door with the kind of overly bright smile that suggested she'd been rehearsing this moment for days. "Evelyn, you look wonderful. So professional." She stepped back to examine my outfit. Dark jeans and a button-down shirt, the same casual uniform I'd worn throughout college, as if expecting to find evidence of my newfound success in my clothing choices. Dad emerged from the living room, and for a moment we just looked at each other across the familiar terrain of the front hallway. He seemed older somehow, though it had only been a few months since our last interaction. His hair had gone grayer at the temples, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke to stress or sleepless nights. "Evie," he said simply, extending his hand for a formal handshake. "Good to see you." A handshake. From my own father. The gesture was so awkward, so carefully neutral, that it revealed more about his emotional state than any conversation could have. Dinner was pot roast with potatoes and carrots, the same meal Mom had prepared for every special occasion throughout my childhood. The dining room table was set with the good china, the plates we'd used maybe 6 times in my entire life. Everything about the scene felt performative, like they were hosting a business dinner rather than welcoming their daughter home. The conversation started safely enough. questions about my commute from Burlington, comments about the weather, updates on neighbors I barely remembered. But the real purpose of the invitation hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore but never directly acknowledged. "So," Dad said finally, cutting his meat with surgical precision, "I read that article about your company." "Which one?" I asked, though we both knew exactly which article he meant. "The Forbes one. Pretty impressive numbers they mentioned. $67 million. The valuation that had apparently transformed me from a disappointing dreamer into someone worth inviting to Sunday dinner." "The journalist did her research," I said carefully, "though valuations are always somewhat speculative. The real measure of success is whether we're helping our customers build better businesses." Mom jumped in with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting hours for this conversational opening. "Mrs. Henderson from down the street showed me the article on her tablet. She said you were on the cover. I had no idea computer programming could be so lucrative. Lucrative. Not meaningful, not innovative, not impactful. Lucrative. It's not really about the money, Mom. Local Connect helps small business owners." $67 million, Dad interrupted, his voice carrying a note I'd never heard before, not quite awe, but something approaching respect. "That's more than I'll make in 3 lifetimes." The statement hung between us, loaded with implications neither of us seemed ready to address directly. This was the closest he'd ever come to acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, his daughter's chosen path had merit. "I've been thinking," he continued, his eyes focused on his plate rather than my face, "about what you said when you were in college. About technology changing how people do business. You said it was all smoke and mirrors." "I know what I said." His voice was quiet, almost defensive, but I've been watching what's happening with the construction business lately. Contractors are using apps to manage job sites, tablets to show clients 3D models of renovations, software to track inventory and schedule workers. Maybe I was too quick to dismiss things I didn't understand. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get, wrapped in the kind of grudging acknowledgement that passed for vulnerability in the Castellanos family. "Some of our local Connect customers are contractors," I said gently. "They use the platform to manage project timelines, track material costs, and communicate with clients. It doesn't replace the actual construction work, it just makes the business side more efficient." Dad nodded slowly, processing this information with the same careful attention he'd bring to reading blueprints or calculating material requirements. "Your cousin Miguel called last week," Mom said, clearly eager to steer the conversation towards safer territory. "He saw the article too. Said he's been trying to get better organized with his landscaping business. Maybe you could help him out?" And there it was, the real reason for the dinner invitation. Not pride in my achievements or interest in my journey, but the hope that my success might somehow benefit the extended family network. Miguel, who I'd barely spoken to since high school, suddenly needed software advice. Other relatives would undoubtedly follow with their own requests for guidance, investment, or employment. "I'd be happy to talk with Miguel about Local Connect," I said diplomatically. "We have specific features designed for service businesses like landscaping." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of awkward small talk and careful politeness. Dad asked a few technical questions about how Local Connect actually worked, displaying a genuine curiosity that I found both touching and frustrating. Where was this interest 4 years ago when I was trying to explain my vision? Why did it take a Forbes article to make my own father take my work seriously? As I prepared to leave, Dad walked me to my car, a gesture that felt both familiar and strange, like a ritual from someone else's childhood. "Evie," he said, his hand resting on my car door, "I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished." The words I'd been waiting to hear for 27 years, delivered in the parking space where he'd once told me I'd never amount to anything in the real world. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. I know I haven't always been supportive of your choices. I was trying to protect you from disappointment, but maybe I was protecting you from success too." It was more introspection than I'd ever heard from Vincent Castellanos, more emotional honesty than our family typically trafficked in. But it also felt incomplete, like a conversation that had started 4 years too late. "I understand," I said, because it seemed like the right thing to say, even though understanding and forgiveness were different things entirely. Driving back to Burlington that evening, I realized that the Forbes article had changed everything and nothing. My parents were proud of me now, but it was pride in my net worth, rather than pride in my character or my choices. They wanted to be associated with my success, but they'd missed the entire journey that had led to that success. The validation I'd been seeking from them for my entire life had finally arrived, but it felt hollow somehow, contingent on external recognition rather than internal worth. Maybe that was the most valuable lesson of all. The approval I'd been chasing was never going to feel the way I'd imagined it would. The acquisition offer arrived on a Tuesday morning in June, delivered via encrypted email from the corporate development team at Meridian Technologies, one of the largest business software companies in North America. The subject line was deceptively casual: partnership opportunity, local connect. But the attached letter of intent was anything but casual. Meridian wanted to acquire Local Connect for $89 million in cash and stock, with earn-out provisions that could push the total value above $120 million if we hit certain growth targets over the next 3 years. I read the proposal 3 times in my office, then walked to the conference room where Daniel, Sarah, and Jessica were already deep into our weekly product planning meeting. The conversation stopped when they saw my expression. "We need to talk," I said, closing the door behind me. The next 2 hours were a crash course in corporate acquisition dynamics that none of us had been prepared for. The Meridian offer was comprehensive and aggressive. They wanted Local Connect's technology, our customer base, and our team. In exchange, they were offering financial security beyond anything we'd imagined when we started the company. "It's a good offer," Jessica said, studying the term sheet with the analytical precision that had made her invaluable during our product development process. "More than good, actually. The valuation is significantly higher than Forbes estimated, and the earnout structure gives us upside if Local Connect continues growing within their ecosystem." "But?" Daniel prompted, because there was clearly a but coming. "But it's also the end of Local Connect as an independent company. We'd become a division of Meridian, subject to their strategic priorities and corporate culture. The kind of rapid iteration and customer-focused development that got us here? That becomes a lot more complicated when you're part of a publicly traded company with quarterly earnings pressure." The weight of the decision pressed down on all of us. This wasn't just about money. It was about the future of something we'd built together, the vision that had driven us through countless 18-hour days and weekend crisis management sessions. Sarah pulled up Local Connect's user dashboard on her laptop, showing the metrics that had become our North Star: 12,847 active customers across all 50 states, monthly recurring revenue of $1.2 million, customer satisfaction scores above 4.8 out of 5. Numbers that represented real businesses, real livelihoods, real people whose operations had improved because of our work. "What happens to them?" she asked quietly. "Our customers, I mean. Meridian's existing small business platform costs 3 times what we charge. Are they going to grandfather our pricing, or will our customers get pushed into more expensive plans?" It was the question that had been nagging at me since I'd first opened the acquisition proposal. Local Connect's success had been built on accessibility, providing enterprise-grade tools at prices that actual small businesses could afford. Meridian's business model, by contrast, was focused on maximizing revenue per customer, which typically meant serving larger businesses with bigger budgets. "We could negotiate protections for existing customers," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I doubted how enforceable such agreements would be once we were absorbed into Meridian's corporate structure. The discussion continued through lunch and into the afternoon, covering every angle we could think of. The financial implications were clear. The acquisition would make all of us wealthy beyond anything we'd imagined when we started Local Connect. Daniel's equity stake alone would be worth over $8 million. Sarah and Jessica would each receive life-changing payouts. I would walk away with enough money to fund my next 10 startup ideas without ever worrying about investor approval. But money wasn't the only consideration. We'd built something special at Local Connect, something that went beyond typical business metrics. Our customer retention rates weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They represented business owners who trusted us with their most critical operations. Our user feedback wasn't just product development input. It was evidence that we were making a real difference in people's lives. That evening, I drove to Millbrook for what had become a monthly ritual, checking in with Mrs. Brennan at the cafe. She'd become our unofficial case study, the customer whose success story we used to explain Local Connect's value proposition to investors, journalists, and new team members. I found Catherine in her usual spot behind the counter, but instead of the calm efficiency I'd grown accustomed to, she seemed frazzled and frustrated. The evening rush was in full swing, but something was clearly wrong with the normal rhythm of operations. "Evelyn," she called when she spotted me. "Thank goodness you're here. We've been having problems with the system all afternoon. Orders aren't syncing between the register and the kitchen. The inventory numbers are showing weird discrepancies, and I can't access last week's sales reports." My heart sank. This was exactly the kind of technical issue that could destroy a small business's trust in technology solutions. Catherine depended on Local Connect for everything from inventory management to customer communications. If our platform was unreliable, it wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a threat to her livelihood. I spent the next hour troubleshooting the problem, eventually tracking it down to a server configuration issue that had affected about 24 customers across our user base. It was the kind of technical glitch that Daniel's team could fix in minutes once they identified the root cause, but for customers like Catherine, those minutes felt like hours of operational chaos. "This is why I was scared to rely on computers in the first place," Catherine said as we waited for the fix to propagate through our systems. "When the old paper system broke down, I could fix it with a pencil. When the computer system breaks down, I'm completely helpless until someone like you shows up." Her words hit harder than any investor pitch or acquisition proposal could have. Catherine wasn't just our customer, she was our responsibility. She'd trusted us with the most critical aspects of her business operations, and that trust came with obligations that extended far beyond quarterly revenue targets. The server issue was resolved within an hour, and Catherine's operations returned to normal. But the experience crystallized something I'd been struggling to articulate about the Meridian acquisition offer. Local Connect wasn't just software. It was a promise. A promise that small business owners could access the same kind of technological tools that large corporations took for granted. A promise that our platform would remain affordable, reliable, and focused on their specific needs rather than generic enterprise requirements. Could we keep those promises as part of Meridian's corporate structure? Would we even be allowed to try? The next morning, I called an all-hands meeting with the entire Local Connect team. Not just the senior staff, but every developer, support specialist, and customer success manager we'd hired over the past 18 months. "I want everyone to know about an opportunity we're considering," I began, then outlined the Meridian acquisition offer in broad strokes. I didn't share specific financial details, but I made clear that this was a life-changing amount of money for everyone in the room. The discussion that followed was unlike any business meeting I'd ever experienced. Instead of focusing on valuations or strategic synergies, our team talked about customers they'd personally helped, features they were excited to build, problems they wanted to solve that went far beyond our current capabilities. "I joined Local Connect because I wanted to build something that mattered," said Lisa Chen, one of our newest developers. "The money is great, but what we're doing here? Helping businesses like my parents' restaurant succeed. That's not something you can put a price on." Similar sentiments echoed around the room. People talked about customer emails they'd received, success stories they'd witnessed, the satisfaction of building technology that actually improved people's lives, rather than just optimizing advertising metrics or engagement algorithms. By the end of the meeting, the decision felt inevitable, even though it was the financially irrational choice. We weren't going to sell Local Connect. We were going to build something bigger. The decision to decline Meridian's acquisition offer required 2 phone calls that would define the next chapter of Local Connect's story and my relationship with my father. The first call was to Marcus Chen at Velocity Ventures, informing him that we were turning down an $89 million payday in favor of building something larger and more meaningful. Marcus took the news with the practiced calm of someone who'd seen entrepreneurs make both brilliant and catastrophic decisions with equal confidence. "It's your company, Evelyn," he said after I'd explained our reasoning. But I hope you understand that walking away from this kind of liquidity means we're now playing for much higher stakes. If you want to build the next billion-dollar software company, you'll need resources that go far beyond what we provided in the Series A. He was right, of course. Competing with companies like Meridian on a global scale would require massive investments in infrastructure, talent, and market expansion. It would mean raising a Series B round that dwarfed our previous funding, probably in the range of $50 million or more. It would mean transforming Local Connect from a profitable small business into a high-growth venture that could justify the kind of returns that venture capitalists demanded. I understand the implications, I told Marcus, but I think we're building something that could be genuinely transformative for small businesses worldwide. The market opportunity is enormous, and we're just scratching the surface. The second call was harder. I found myself sitting in my car outside the Local Connect office on a Thursday evening in late June, staring at my father's contact information and trying to figure out how to explain a decision that would probably confirm every suspicion he'd ever had about my judgment. The conversation started predictably enough. Awkward small talk about work and weather. The careful politeness that had characterized our interaction since the Forbes article had temporarily elevated me in his estimation. But eventually, I had to address the elephant in the room. Dad, I wanted to let you know that Local Connect received an acquisition offer, a significant one. Oh? His voice perked up with interest. How significant? $89 million. The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. 89 million? He repeated slowly, like he was testing the words to make sure they made sense. Jesus, Evie. That's more money than our entire family has made in 3 generations combined. I know. So when do you sign the papers? When does the money come through? This was the part I'd been dreading. We're not taking the offer, Dad. Another silence, this one heavier and more ominous than the first. You're not taking it, he said finally. $89 million. And you're not taking it.
No. We think Local Connect can be bigger, can help more people. The acquiring company would have changed our mission, probably raised prices for our customers. We want to stay independent and build something that really matters. Something that matters. His voice had taken on the edge I remembered from childhood, the tone that preceded lectures about responsibility and realistic expectations. Evie, do you have any idea what $89 million means? That's enough money to buy a house for every member of our family. That's enough to retire, to never worry about money again, to guarantee your children and your children's children will be financially secure. It's not about the money, Dad. It's always about the money, he erupted, and suddenly we were back in familiar territory. Me trying to explain dreams he couldn't understand, him trying to inject pragmatism into situations he viewed as fundamentally impractical. You think these investor people are going to keep writing you checks forever? You think there's going to be another offer like this if your little computer company starts losing customers? The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth I'd been trying not to think about. Venture capital was a game of enormous wins and catastrophic losses, and companies that turned down acquisition offers sometimes found themselves with nothing when market conditions changed or competitors gained traction. I understand the risks, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But I also understand what we're building. Local Connect isn't just software. It's infrastructure for small business success. We're helping people like Mrs. Brennan expand their operations, create jobs, build generational wealth in their communities. Mrs. Brennan runs a coffee shop, Evie. She's not building an empire. She opened a second location last month. She's employing 8 people now instead of 3. She's considering franchising the concept to other towns. That's not empire building? Dad was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Look, he said finally, his voice softer but still strained with concern. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I really am. But I've been poor, sweetheart. I've had weeks where I wasn't sure we could pay the electric bill. I've watched good people lose everything because they bet on themselves and the world didn't cooperate. Don't throw away a sure thing for a maybe. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering familiar ground about risk tolerance, financial security, and the difference between dreams and delusions. But by the end, something had shifted. Dad wasn't dismissing my judgment anymore. He was worried about it. He saw Local Connect as real, valuable, worthy of concern. His opposition came from fear for my well-being rather than doubt about my capabilities. "I love you, Dad," I said as we prepared to hang up. "I know this doesn't make sense from your perspective, but I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing." "I love you too, sweetheart. I just hope you're right." 6 months later, Local Connect announced our Series B funding round, $47 million led by Andreessen Horowitz, with participation from several other top-tier venture firms. The round valued the company at $380 million, making it one of the largest Series B deals in small business software history. By that point, we had over 28,000 active customers across 6 countries, monthly recurring revenue approaching $4 million, and a team of 147 employees working out of offices in Burlington, Austin, and London. We'd launched mobile apps, built enterprise features for larger customers, and developed integrations with over 200 third-party business tools. But the metric I was proudest of wasn't financial. It was the fact that Local Connect customers were, on average, 34% more profitable after their first year on our platform than they'd been before. We weren't just building software, we were building economic opportunity at scale. The Forbes call came on a Tuesday in December, almost exactly 2 years after Rebecca Martinez's original article had launched Local Connect into the national conversation. "Ms. Castellanos, this is David Chen from Forbes. No relation to your investor Marcus Chen. We're working on our annual feature about the fastest-growing private companies in America, and Local Connect is at the top of our list. Could we schedule some time to discuss your company's trajectory?" The second Forbes article, published 3 weeks later, carried a headline that would have seemed impossible when I was fixing bug reports in my Technova cubicle. "The $400 million unicorn, how Evelyn Castellanos built America's fastest-growing small business platform." This time, my father's response was immediate. The phone rang within an hour of the article going live.
"Evie," he said, his voice carrying a note I'd never heard before. Pure, uncomplicated pride. "I just read the article. $400 million. Dad." "No, let me finish. I was wrong. About everything. About technology, about your judgment, about what constitutes real work and real success. You didn't just build a company. You built something that's changing how business works in this country." The words I'd waited my entire life to hear, delivered with the kind of genuine emotion that our family had never been comfortable expressing. "I know I haven't always believed in your dreams," he continued, "but I want you to know that watching you prove me wrong has been the proudest experience of my life. You didn't just amount to something, sweetheart. You amounted to everything. Sometimes the people who doubt you the loudest become your biggest champions when success speaks louder than their fears. And sometimes the best revenge against those who said you'd never amount to anything is building something so meaningful that proving them wrong becomes irrelevant compared to the impact you're making on the world." Local Connect went on to become one of the most successful software companies of our generation. But the real victory wasn't the valuation or the media coverage or even my father's eventual pride. The real victory was the 50,000 small businesses that used our platform to build better lives for themselves and their families, one optimized process at a time. Have you ever had someone tell you that your dreams were unrealistic? What did you do to prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments below, because the world needs more dreamers who refuse to accept other people's limitations. And if this story inspired you to chase your own impossible goals, subscribe for more stories about turning doubt into determination and building something that matters. Because sometimes the best way to prove someone wrong is to prove yourself right. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out